down. So in this lecture we're going to take Okay, so we have contrast down. So in this lecture we're going to take a look at color balance. Now at the top of this section in the module asset download info, there's a link that gives you a series of TIFF stills. These stills up here, which all have different problematic color casts on them, and we have to fix them for this exercise. So I can just click and drag them in, I can bring them in, and once I've done that, I'm bringing them into a dedicated bin. I will right click that bin and choose create new timeline using selected bin, just like last time, just like we did with the scene cut detector. I'm going to call this one stills and hit create, and then we can go straight on to the color panel. So we have a series of color casts that we need to fix here, and these stills are taken from two future projects further on in the course. I thought it would be good to have a preview of what we have to deal with. So let's take a look at how we fix a color cast, and let's take a look at how we read the scopes whilst doing so. Now the first thing I need to do is I need to bring up my parade scopes. If we have work to do like this, if we have to solve color casts, we should be looking at the parade scopes. So let's take a look at what we have. Clearly a very red image. Warm color casts are my least favorite. I just think they don't look good, usually because it makes it harder to pick the skin tones out from the background, because everything then becomes kind of warm and orange colored. Actors just don't stand out that way. We lack contrast with a warm color cast usually. I can see in my red channel that my shadows are much higher in my red channel than in my green or blue channels. So I can now see that my red cast is in my shadows. That's what this tells me. This bit is higher than the others. The highlights are more or less clean, actually. Maybe a little bit cyan in the highlights, but the shadows are very red because the lower part is much higher up in the red channel than it is in the green or the blue. So let's talk about how we neutralize a color cast. We neutralize a color by adding its complementary color to it. That's how we neutralize colors in RGB color space. Now the explanation for this: pixels have red, blue and green values. We call this an RGB triplet value. And if all three colors are the same, we have a true neutral color. Now, the complementary color is basically the missing color or colors from the pixel. If I have a pixel with just red in it, its complementary would be an even mix of blue and green, which makes cyan. If I have a cyan pixel, it's just missing red. If we add the missing color in, what we do is we make all of the RGB values the same, and that neutralizes the color cast. In practice, it's much simpler. In practice, if we have a color cast, we go to the corresponding part of the tonal range, the corresponding wheel here, and I can identify that this color cast is in my shadows. So I grab this little dot in the center of my crosshair, and if I move that around, as I move it towards different colors in the color wheel, I'm adding those colors to the image. But the easiest way of thinking about this is I drag this away from the color I want to neutralize and remove. And I do that until my red, green and blue bases line up on my parade graph. So I can see that I've got red, orange. Oh look, there's red, orange. I'm just going to drag the target away from them. And over time you just build up a muscle memory as to what kind of moves over here produce what kind of differences in the graph over there. So that's quite simple. We drag away from a color we want to neutralize in the frame. That's the easiest way of dealing with this. So let's take a look at the next one. This looks like, well, there's definitely blue in the shadows and a little bit of red. So we've got a slightly magenta cast in our shadows here. we're going to start mixing colours. So blue and red equals magenta. Red and green equals yellow. Blue and green equals cyan. The hair's a little bit purple on this shot, and everything looks a little bit purple. Purple can be a very problematic colour cast because magenta and purple are the least common naturally occurring colours. That's not to say that they don't exist. Some people say that magenta light does not actually exist. There's an argument for that we're not going to get into right now because it's a pointless argument, to be perfectly frank. It's a very unnatural looking colour cast to have pretty much across the board. Unless you're going for something very stylized, it's not a good idea. So I can establish I've got purple. I therefore want to drag away from purple, which happens to be towards green. And I just keep going until it levels out across the bottom there. And addressing a colour cast with primaries is this simple. I've got a blue push here. We often refer to colour casts as either excursions or push. A blue push is a blue tint, a red push is a red tint. So this one looks a little bit blue in the mids and a little bit blue in the highlights. So I can just push away from blue, which happens to be towards yellow. And I can just warm it up a little bit. And there we go. And then I can see the difference. That was very blue. And now that's a bit more neutral. We still have some blue highlights on this man's kind of gelled hair here. That's because in this shot we are mixing daylight and tungsten. And I'm sure, as anyone with a basic knowledge of lighting knows, if we colour balance to tungsten, daylight looks blue. If we colour balance to daylight, tungsten light looks orange. If we mix the two in a shot, we have to perform a secondary to fix that. We're not going to do that here. We're going to do secondaries in the next section of the course, so don't worry about that for now. So by now, we can go through and we can look at the colour casts we have in these images. I've got magenta in here. What I can do... Now, that wall is a little bit blue. And then I can just cool down the mids ever so slightly and maybe take a little bit of blue out the shadows. And there I've got a reasonably neutral image as well. Maybe those highlights look a little bit green, so I can push slightly more towards magenta, get rid of those. So this is just the basic idea. What we do is we look at the image. Okay, this clearly has a magenta push. It pretty much looks to be in the highlights. So you can see, we've got pretty high red and blue up here and lower green. That indicates highlights and midtones. So then we just start making these adjustments until we get a more neutral image. So your task is to finish the job. You've got shot 5 and shot 6 to work on. Remember, at this point it's just easy enough to think we're dragging the target away from the color we want to neutralize in the frame. You have to look at your shot, you have to look at your parades, you have to think, where is my push, where is my color cast? And then you have to take appropriate action in order to neutralize it. We drag the target away from the color we want to neutralize, which just so happens to be adding its complementary color to it, thus neutralizing the color cast. So go ahead and finish off shots 5 and shot 6, and then click on through to the next lecture. Once